People can't afford homes anymore. And if the American dream means owning your own place, then that dream is a fantasy. The media tells us that story every day. I believed it. Public opinion polls show that most people believe it. And you probably do too, because that message is everywhere. But in just a few minutes, you're gonna see how they misled you. Hey, I'm Ken LaCourte. I research tricky questions and I do my best to give you balanced insight. This channel isn't about easy answers or dunking on the other guys. It's about trying to understand the nuances of how the world actually works. So, after seeing dozens of headlines saying that homeownership was in the toilet, I researched to see how bad it really was. And I truly was shocked that it just isn't true. The data tell a completely different story. One of the first sites I came to was the Federal Reserve statistics, which completely undermine that narrative. This is the homeownership rate in the United States over the past 60 years. And as you'll see, it's pretty consistent. And the current homeownership rate is 65.6%. That's almost 2/3 of the country, and only 3.5 points behind the all-time high, which was right before the housing crash of 2008. That was driven by banks giving loans to people who clearly couldn't pay them. But what if we go a bit further back in history, when houses were so much cheaper, which they were? Actually, back in the good old days when my parents were growing up, the homeownership rates were substantially lower. In 1940, it sat at just 43.6%, and after World War II rose to the 60% range, and it never looked back. Then I wondered if maybe it was a generational thing. Old people living longer in their homes. Certainly younger people have a harder time until they can afford a home. But this chart shows that by the time people hit 40 years old, the homeownership rates have been pretty similar, with Gen X a bit higher than baby boomers or millennials. Homes are expensive, but a homeownership crisis just doesn't exist. Okay, so I need to geek out for a second here. The national homeownership rate isn't exactly the percentage of people who own their own home. It's the percentage of homes themselves which are occupied by owners. It's close, but it's different, and it's a very good proxy. It's how everyone in the world tracks it because it's a more clear way of looking at family units. Otherwise, kids who are living with their parents might get counted as renters. And how does the US compare to the rest of the world? It's very much in the middle of the pack. It's similar to Europe and really the rest of the entire industrial world. These numbers clearly make the point that homeownership is alive and well in America, but I certainly don't want to give the impression that it's cheap or easy for the average person. It's far from that. It's a hurdle, and it's a higher hurdle than it's ever been. Homes have gotten more expensive, which is the root cause of the media freakout. Now, those details are very interesting, but first, just give me a minute to answer the question, does this really matter? I mean, renting is pretty easy, so should we care if people own their own homes? The truth is, it matters a lot, both to communities and to individuals. Let me give you just a personal example. When I was young, I rented in New York City for a number of years and eventually saved up enough money to buy a small house near LA. I poured my entire life savings on a down payment and then committed to a very scary 30-year loan. Then a few months later, after I settled in, I saw a young man on the corner selling flags, and he'd tied up samples of them on a chain link fence behind him. And all of them were fine, except one was a Nazi flag. Now in New York, I would have walked by and given him that type of look, but this was my neighborhood now, and I pulled my car over. It was LA, nobody walks. And I let him know that he needed to take that Nazi flag down right now. And he did. He wasn't a bad kid. He bought a pack of 100 flags and just didn't think about it. But I was surprised by my reaction. I'm not the you have to do this kind of a guy in life, but that frickin' flag was coming down one way or another right then. Once I was locked into my community and everything I owned in that house, I cared about that neighborhood like never before. And that's why when people own their own homes, they're nicer neighborhoods. They have fresher paint, less litter, cute plants out front. As human beings, we take better care of the things we own. That's why all smart governments encourage homeownership. I mean, the biggest tax break in the United States is the home loan deduction, and that's why we have it. And that helps make owning a home a great way to build wealth over your lifetime. It's generally a very good investment. Okay, so back to the media hyperventilation. At the heart of the matter is that homes are getting more expensive. Well, everything is, but even more, they've gotten substantially more expensive in comparison to people's incomes. They're less affordable for the average person, and the press gets that concept and turns it up to an 11. I love this one. In Las Vegas, most of the homes that someone evidently afforded were unaffordable.
You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Okay, so right now, I should be confusing you. I mean, I said that Both more people own homes now than in the past, but I say they're also less affordable right now than they were in the past. So what gives? Those are the facts though. So I investigated it, and some say it's because we have more two-income households now, and that's true, but the affordability numbers are based on combined household incomes. The answer is that people can spend more of their money on housing because other big expenses have been dropping. The biggest one really surprised me: food. In the 1950s, households spent about 30% of their income on food. That's about what we spend on housing today. And that's a lot of money for food. And they didn't eat out nearly as often as we do now. Today, that number is 12.8% because food just got cheaper. Clothes, too. I was surprised that households used to spend 10% of their income on clothes and jewelry. Today, that's just 3%. So why have so many things become more affordable but not homes? Part of that is land. You can grow more tomatoes, but you can't grow more real estate where people want to live. But two factors to look at are building regulations and the fact that homes today are hugely bigger and better than they've ever been. If you've ever tried to build a home, dealing with the government can be a nightmare. Regulations are far stricter than they've ever been. In the 50s, building codes focused on basic structure. Today, homes are required to withstand higher winds, earthquakes, fire resistance. Many governments mandate energy efficiency and accessibility features for the disabled, setbacks from the street, and aesthetic regulations. My last point is one that my dad always told me, but I never fully appreciated it until I just studied it. It's hard to even compare the average home in 1950 with one today. First of all, they were small. The average size of a single-family home built in 1950 was 983 square feet. Today, it's about 2,400 square feet, 2.5 times bigger. And families were bigger then too, usually sharing one bathroom and stacking the kids in a small bedroom. 10% of homes today have a swimming pool, something that was super rare back then, as was air conditioning, dishwashers, marble floors, attached garages, good insulation, large windows, sprinkler systems. A lot of luxuries we just take for granted today, they didn't have any of that. So homes are expensive, but more people own them now than in the past because they can, because they're better, and because they're still a good investment. It's hard to fully evaluate the past, but for homes, which era would you rather live in? I'd vote for air conditioners, but that's just me. I hope I gave you some interesting things to think about. I did my best to give it to you fairly. If you like this video, you may also be interested in this one about penises. Okay, it's actually less about ding-dongs, but a short video about how the media and scientists let clicks and fame interfere with their judgment. And like this story, they created a completely false impression. I hope you come back again soon. I'm Ken LaCourte. Until next time.